In the Bible, we come across a few odd teachings of Jesus. Love your enemies, and do not resist an evil person, but instead turn to them your other cheek. These verses always stumped me. Are we to respond to injury without revenge and allow even more injury? If somebody murders my son, should I also offer him my other son? Love your enemies? You mean if somebody is trying to kill my family, I should send them a box of chocolates? I now realize as I read these verses with a new perspective that this is not at all what Jesus is saying. What he is saying is actually profoundly empathetic and acting with great moral integrity. It all finally began to make sense to me, as I have often found myself being somebody who others are jealous of, intimidated by, or perhaps for some unknowable reason just do not like me. I am an artist, and perhaps in some ways an odd character. So needless to say, I have encountered this often in my life. Sometimes there is nothing you can do to change this situation, even if you try. So this is where the turn your other cheek resonated so clearly for me, and at last has made perfect sense. Have you ever heard of the Cinderella effect? It is an actual psychological term. You see, Cinderella lived with a stepmom and two stepsisters that did not like her. Instead of admitting how they don't like Cinderella, they would instead express their ill feelings in different ways. They would try to sabotage Cinderella's life in a much more subtle manner, and always try to make things harder on her. Cups were never clean enough. Floors were never scrubbed long enough. Cinderella was closely monitored in order to find and point out any fault in every flaw. Everything Cinderella did or said was met with poor report, negativity, or opposition. Kindness or praise was very rarely offered. The Cinderella effect can likely become your reality at home or at work. If you are a victim of this psychological attack, this is where the love your enemies and turn the other cheek comes into play in your life. It is your growth opportunity. Absorb the mental punches gracefully and feel compassion for them, because you know it is they who are actually the ones hurting. It is they who are struggling, not you. You can handle scrubbing a floor for 10 minutes more, turning your cheek and offering them the other one. If you are a strong and good-hearted person who strives to do and be well, their negativity will not penetrate you. It just bounces off. You can easily jump that extra hurdle they throw your way, and at the same time be kind or empathetic to their problems. Return their negativity not with revenge or more negativity, but rather with love. Honest love. No, you may never win them over or change their heart, but even still, never repay evil with evil, is what Jesus is ultimately saying. You may have become a target for their toxic darts, but you are also immune to the poison, and your heart is far above throwing any back at them. In the end, you will have not only risen to a higher level of compassion and integrity, but both Jesus and the story of Cinderella tell of a happy ending for you. an honorable and well-deserved reward. A little hope never hurt anybody. And in the process, hopefully, you will have inspired them, because, according to Jesus, it is these kinds of folks who will need to change the most, or they will not have a happy ending. You see, Jesus never taught that you have to believe in Him or God to get into heaven. Never. Not in His words. Jesus was a Jew. Jews have never believed in a Christian heaven or hell doctrine. Jews believed that you would experience punishment or endure hardship because you were out of alignment with God's will. And every word of Jesus supports this ideology. In fact, Jesus teaches explicitly that if you follow His guidelines on how to be a good person, turn the other cheek, and love your enemies, you're in favor with God. And all those who failed will meet Him, and He will say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." Not because they failed to believe in Him, no, but because they failed to live according to His teachings. Jesus is speaking to those who did believe, but He could see through their disingenuous lives. Their mean, lying, or spiteful spirit has been exposed. Never did Jesus say, "Oh, but I will forgive you." Not at all. He says the exact opposite. "Depart from me because of your iniquities." And again, in the wedding parable, Jesus stresses how believers, and those who say they loved Him, do not join Him. This story implies how it is a stranger who never knew Jesus, the ones who turned the other cheek and loved their enemies, that sits down to supper with Jesus at the wedding feast. And again, in the parable of Lazarus, Jesus condemns a rich man, not for a lack of belief in God, but rather specifically for not loving and caring for poor Lazarus. Folks, the teachings spoken of by Jesus could not be made any more clear. The Christian concept that you go to heaven or avoid hell based on whether or not you believe in the correct God is a later theology developed by later Christian leaders and scribes. Perhaps to scare people into church or tithing? Few Christians actually read or understand the actual words of Jesus, or the letters written in red, but rather cling to these later religious traditions that Jesus never taught. They cling to them like some kind of insurance plan or safety net. Most Christians believe they are automatically forgiven if they just say they believe in Jesus, which allows them to continue being an ass with very little to no moral improvement or spiritual growth. Due to this strange belief that you must confess a love for Jesus and worship the correct God, many Christians will struggle with the concept of hell because they most likely have friends or loved ones, perhaps their very own child, who don't believe. But they need not struggle with this hell doctrine if they stick to the words of Jesus. Jesus is not concerned about people praising or loving Him. I do not believe He was ever that vain. He cares about people helping and loving each other. He cares about your moral growth and character development. All of this forgiveness thrown around by Christians only makes them morally lazy. Here is what Jesus says precisely on this point. Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, for I was hungry, and you didn't feed me.' Then they will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry?' And he will answer, 'When you refused to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me.' And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life." Jesus is saying very clearly, "I am humanity." And did Jesus say anything about having to believe in him? No. Did he ever once say he would forgive them for their sins? No. Or that the righteous ones were those who believed in God? No. His teachings are always clear, precise, and consistent. He says, "Depart from me for your iniquities," and is constantly stressing to us to grow in moral integrity and get back into alignment with God. Love your enemies, because it is that evil stepmom and two rotten stepsisters of Cinderella, who might even believe in Jesus, who desperately need your integrity and inspiration the most. The teachings of Jesus mean a lot to me and have contributed to improving my moral compass. He is not my only source for moral improvement. There are many other wonderful, loving, and inspiring people and sources for living a better and more loving life. But if I had to make a list of a top 10, Jesus would be in there. So now I turn my focus onto the title of this video. I have often had people ask me, "Why do you hate Jesus so much?" I don't. Rarely would I find reason to hate anybody, and I certainly do not hate Jesus. To the contrary, I am listening to his words carefully, and I am a humble fan. It is true that I don't believe in angels, devils, virgin births, and God-men floating up into the clouds. And nor do I believe anybody has to believe in these kinds of things or be a Christian in order to get to heaven or avoid a fiery hell. In fact, nothing could be more silly and demented from my perspective. I also realize some scholars believe Jesus never existed, and I am intrigued by the evidence they present. But I do tend to lean more toward the historical Jesus camp, and that if there really was a historical man named Jesus, the words written and read by those who adored him likely have some close historical context to what he would have really taught and believed. We can safely conclude that Jesus was a compassionate human who concerned himself with equality, love, and empathy. He especially cared about the poor, the sick, and those who were troubled. He hung out with prostitutes, not because he endorsed the lifestyle, but instead to show love and offer help if possible. He was firmly against the rich who would store up treasure on earth, and promoted love as the most valuable currency. And certainly he inspired thousands to retell his teachings orally for many years to come. I really think we should be more diligent, not to mix up too much religion or myth with the man. And why did Rome put such a good man to death, you might ask? Well, when you get too popular and gather too many followers, perhaps people start referring to you as a religious messiah or a king of the Jews. things can become political real quick, and that's for another conversation. Stay strong and wise, my friends.
Chloe likes to dance while half of her cries. It blurs the lines between what's wrong and right. We don't care what it's like down here, and we don't know what it's like up there, and we don't care what it's like down here, and we don't know what it's like on our street. Living on our street, and I don't even know. I can't even say we got nothing hiding in our